All right, now this section of questions is titled Interwar Policies. Basically, this is that period between World War I and World War II. Yeah, it also coincides with our Great Depression, but um, this is more talking about global policies and foreign policies and how we got along with the rest of the world. All right, number one, which of the following best explains why the U.S. Senate rejected American participation in the League of Nations after World War One? All right, let's sit back and think about this for a second. World War One started out as a fight between two tiny little countries. It escalated into a world war because each one of these tiny little countries was tied to larger countries in all these agreements. Okay, and because of these agreements, what should have been a small isolated incident turned into a world war. Okay, so the League of Nations, by definition, and just by the name of it, is tying a bunch of countries together. Okay, so what type of problem might they have with that? Well, if we sit back here and try to formulate an answer to begin with, maybe it's the fact that we would be kind of lumped in with other countries and we didn't want to be. All right, so let's look at A. Senators thought the League of membership would cost too much money. That has nothing to do with it at all. We can remove A. B. Senators thought that the League would interfere with Latin American affairs. They might, but that wasn't a major concern at that point. At that point, we're primarily focused on Europe. C. Senators thought the League would require its members to reduce tariffs. That actually does become a possibility, but again, it's not the big thing. D. Senators thought the League membership would undermine American sovereignty. In other words, undermine America's freedom to do pretty much what we want. And that's what it's going to be, D. Number two, how did the Democratic administration influence politics during the Great Depression and World War II? Okay, so who was in office during the Great Depression and World War II? We're talking about FDR. So what kind of things did they do um, domestically during this time period? A. They broadened states' rights to avoid military conflict. No, that has nothing to do with it. Remove A. B. They engaged in propaganda to defeat other political parties. Yeah, maybe isolated incidents, but no, that's not it. So we can eliminate B. C. They expanded government involvement in people's lives. Well, let's hold on to that one for a minute. D. They followed a laissez-faire economic approach to avoid regulation. No, that's kind of what got us in the Great Depression in the first place. It's going to be C. The New Deal, which was passed during this time period, is Roosevelt's plan to get us out of the Great Depression. It basically interwove the government in every possible aspect of your daily life. As far as more people went to work for the government had more control over different aspects of your life than they ever had before. So it's going to be C. All right, number three. In 1919, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes summarized the opinion of the Supreme Court in Schenck versus the United States. The question in every case is whether the words are used to create a clear and present danger that will bring about the substantive evils that Congress has a right to prevent. When a nation is at war, many things that might be said in time of peace will not be endured so long as men fight, and no court could regard them as protected by any constitutional right. How did this ruling alter the behavior within the U.S. society? All right. So basically, it's saying in a time of war, you got to be careful what you say. They're not going to protect your freedom of speech indefinitely during time of war if you're trying to start something. The example was used during the same thing, during the same little statement that you couldn't yell fire in a crowded theater. You know, it's the same kind of situation. All right, so let's look. A. Public debates concerning issues of national security were no longer tolerated. Debates, that's not necessarily an issue, so we can get rid of that one. B. Critical comments regarding the governing party were no longer tolerated. You could criticize. Okay, so it's not going to be that one. C. Legal scholars were targets of investigations during national crisis. Not really. D. Civil liberties were subject to interpretation during national crisis. In other words, your particular freedoms might be limited during times of national crisis. And that's what it's going to be. D. Number 4. Congress adopted the Lend-Lease Act in 1941. All right, so here's some of the powers on it. The presidential powers under the Lend-Lease Act to sell or lend equipment to any country that the president deems vital to the defense of the U.S. decide what item and equipment to loan, direct domestic industries to convert to armaments and munitions production. Okay, so which conclusion is supported by the details of this law? All right. Um, Basically gave the president the power to decide who we were going to loan stuff to and what we were going to loan, and basically get companies to get on board with it. So it's A. Lend-Lease Act expanded presidential power to offer aid to foreign countries. To me, that's the answer right there. I mean, plain and simple. It is A. All right, number 5. Now, this little cartoon right here, it shows a bride and a groom, and the preacher is sitting there saying, by the way, the groom, it's Uncle Sam, in case you can't see that. The bride is foreign entanglements. In other words, that he's going to get hitched up to all sorts of things and issues with other countries. All right, now it says, if any man disagrees with this union, let him speak now. If you look there, the book that the preacher is reading out of, instead of being the Bible, is the League of Nations. And in the background, you've got the U.S. Senate, speaking. So the Senate has a problem with us getting involved with the League of Nations and possibly foreign entanglements. All right, so the period that depicted that being depicted in the cartoon above involves the U.S. after which of the following conflicts? It's going to be World War I, because that's when the whole League of Nations thing happened. It's going to be B. Number 6. President Wilson's vision for international policy after World War I is contained in the what? Okay, this is a DOK level 1 type of question. This is a simple, straightforward, just something you need to memorize. It's going to be, President Wilson wrote his 14 points. Ironically, he showed up to Paris to, be involved in this peace treaty, and nobody really listened to anything he said. They ignored pretty much all of the 14 points except for the idea that we needed to form the League of Nations, which, ironically enough, that was the point that kept our own Senate from ratifying the treaty in the first place. All right, number 7. To maintain the United States as an arsenal for democracy in World War II, Congress passed what? The Dawes Act, the Lend-Lease Act, the Open Door Policy, or the Good Neighbor Policy? Let's just have some common sense here. The Dawes Act has to do with the West. Okay, it's not that. Lend-Lease Act. Okay, we've already talked about that a little bit. It has to do with giving weapons, to our allies. So maybe it's that. Open Door Policy. It has to do with people coming and going. Good Neighbor Policy having to do with, us not butting into the foreign affairs of our neighbors. Okay, it's going to be B, the Lend-Lease Act. Number 8, the spirit of post-war isolationism in America is best illustrated in 1920 when the United States Senate rejected the American participation in the what? All right, again, isolationism. Okay, we wanted to be isolationists after World War I. In other words, we wanted to be by ourselves. We didn't want to be tied to anybody else. So that's why the Senate rejected the League of Nations. B. All right, number 9. This map up here with these arrows depicts the flow of Lend-Lease aid. In other words, how much money and how many supplies and things we sent to what parts of the world during 1941. Okay, now notice this is March of 1941. We don't actually get involved in World War II until December of 1941 when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. So this is before we're involved. All right, so Congress passed the Lend-Lease Act allowing President Roosevelt to sell or lend war supplies to any nation whose defense was essential to America's security according to this map. The primary recipient of the program was who? All right, now to figure this out, you need to look for the biggest arrow, the thickest, widest arrow. Okay, in this case, the thickest, widest arrow is coming up right over here off the coast of Europe. It's going to be Great Britain. All right, number 10. Which of the following is true of the Selective Training and Service Act of 1940, commonly referred to as the military draft? All right, A, it required both men and women to register for military service. We can go ahead and eliminate that. It doesn't. B, it required able-bodied men between the ages of 15 and 65 to register. You don't register for selective service at 15, so it's not B. We can eliminate that. C, it mandated military service for all high school dropouts. No, it didn't. Okay, so we can eliminate that. D, it was enacted during a period when the U.S. was at peace. Now, notice, again, This was 1940. We did not get involved in World War II until December 7th, 1941. Okay, so we were not at war technically when this happened. Were we preparing for war? Absolutely, we were. That's why this was passed. Everybody knew that the conflict might, or we might get drawn into the conflict. All right, number 11. Which term best describes the diplomacy followed by some European nations and the relations with Germany, Italy, and Japan between 1931 and 1939? So this is before the official start of World War II. Okay, we kind of tried to give them what they wanted to keep from fighting. So, which one of these words talks about, trying to make somebody happy? Okay, it's going to be appeasement, A. Okay, specifically, kind of what crossed the line was, and it failed. I mean, we tried to appease Germany. We told them to take part of the Sudetenland, which they claim was part of, that should be part of Germany anyway, because they were Germanic people, and they took it, and then they decided to take all of Czechoslovakia. So it didn't work. It was a failure, but the policy was appeasement. Number 12. Which event damaged the reputation of President Warren Harding? Okay, Warren Harding was the president who was a bit of a partier. Warren Harding, it's come out of, become public knowledge since his presidency that he fathered several children out of wedlock. He is the president who lost the presidential china in a card game at the White House. He was a bit of a partier. He also trusted his little group of people that he brought with him, his advisors and everything, to the point that it didn't lead to his downfall because he had passed away before all the details of everything came out. But specifically, the Teapot Dome scandal. One of his buddies takes money, or takes oil deposits that were earmarked for our Navy and has them transferred into the Department of the Interior. And then, because he's in charge of the Department of Interior, he cuts a deal with a private company to let them drill and tap into those oil deposits for a kickback. And it's a huge thing. It's the Teapot Dome controversy. All right, number 13. Which action best demonstrates the policy of U.S. isolationism in the 1930s? In other words, we don't want to get involved. Is it A, the adoption of the Good Neighbor policy? Well, maybe. We'll hold on to that one. B, passage of the Neutrality Acts. In other words, we're going to stay neutral. Let's hold on to that. C, the official recognition of the Soviet Union. It really has nothing to do with this. Or D, creation of the Popular Front to oppose fascism. If we're trying to stay independent, we don't want to oppose anything. So we can probably eliminate D. So we can eliminate C and D. Let's look at A and B. It's going to be B, the Neutrality Acts. And just the word neutrality should be enough to show you that we were trying to stay out of it. We were trying to stay isolated. All right, number 14. In 1943, 15% of the shipyard workers in San Francisco were Chinese Americans. Before this, they had been largely confined to working in restaurants and laundries. The switch in occupation was due, in large part, to what? All right, so first of all, let's look at the time period. 1943. We're in the middle of World War II. Okay, so that's going on. Did they bring the Chinese in because of their shipbuilding skills? No. Otherwise, they would have been building ships way before this. Okay. B. Increased availability of higher education for immigrants. I don't even know how to point out how bad, how just not correct that one is, so we'll eliminate that one. C. Increased labor union restrictions against Chinese American workers. Well, if there were increased restrictions, there wouldn't be an increase in the number of workers, of Chinese Americans that were working, so it's not that. Or D. Massive need for workers to build ships during World War II. Let's see here. They're sinking ships about as quick as we can build them. So the answer to this one's going to be D. All right, number 15. Why did President Franklin D. Roosevelt refrain from intervening in Europe during the rise of totalitarian regimes in Germany and Italy? So why didn't he get involved? A large portion of the American public did not support U.S. involvement in Europe. That makes a lot of sense. Let's hold on to that one. B. President Roosevelt did not believe the U.S. military could defeat the German military. Yeah, that has nothing to do with it. Remove that one. C. The leaders of Britain and France did not want the U.S. intervening in European affairs. Yeah, they did. They wanted our help in this. D. President Roosevelt was afraid that a prolonged war would further damage the weakened U.S. economy. No, a prolonged war, if we weren't involved, would, if anything, benefit our economy. So it's not that. It's A. A large portion of the American public did not support U.S. involvement in Europe. And I know in retrospect we look back and see and we characterize the Nazis and the Germans as being, the evil in World War II. But here's something that a lot of people don't quite realize. The largest group of Caucasians, of Caucasian Americans, in other words, the largest group that came from Europe to America, are German. Of the Caucasians living in America today, there is more German blood than anything else. Likewise, there are also large numbers of Italian, and large numbers of Polish, and large numbers of British. And you see where, by and large, we were divided. There were a lot of Americans, I'm not going to say they supported the Germans, but they had German heritage. Okay, so they might not want to get involved with this. It's going to be A.